Okay, excellent. Again, good morning or good afternoon if you've just joined us. My name is Stacy Gorkoff, and I work with both the marketing and the channel development teams here at INETCO. A big thank you to all of you for joining us for today's session on preventing ATM cash-out attacks. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started. Questions are always fantastic. You can enter them into the chat box, and we will be able to address these at the end of the session. We will be recording the session, so the idea is that we can send this out within the next 24 hours. You don't need to take a lot of notes. This will be coming to you for sure. And then if at any time you are experiencing any type of sound quality issues or you can't see the slides, let me know via the chat. We will do our best to troubleshoot and help you out. So with that, now let's take a moment to introduce Ugan Naidoo. He is INETCO's VP of Engineering and Services. Now, Ugan brings about 20 years of experience. This experience ranges across business, engineering, and technology disciplines. Prior to working with us here at INETCO, he held leadership positions at Fujitsu, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and most recently CA Technologies, where he was the Managing Director of CA Security. With that, we are very excited to have you here with us today, and we look forward to hearing a little bit more about your firsthand experiences when it comes to payment security. Take it away, Ugan.
Thank you, Stacy, for the great intro. Hello, and again, welcome everyone to this really exciting webinar. So that's me in the picture. I have been working in the information security / fraud management space for just going over 20 years now. Helping organizations test and implementing controls continues to be a rather strange, yet a fulfilling passion of mine. I hope you will have some important takeaways from today's talk. Now, let's have a look at what's planned for today's webinar. I will go through an overview of what's been making recent headlines. We will then go into a case study so we can better understand the signature of these attacks. We will do a deep dive into how these attacks take place. And we will look into some recommendations on how to prevent this sort of attack. Just depending on how long the talk is, I should leave probably about 15 minutes at the very end for questions and answers. Now let's dive right in. So what's happened? Well, we know that on August the 10th, the FBI issued a private industry notification, which went out to banks indicating that cyber criminals were planning to conduct a global cash-out scheme in the coming days. In this alert, the FBI introduced the attack as an unlimited operations attack. And they went on to say that the unlimited operations attack compromises a financial institution or payment card processor. This is all done with malware, with the specific purpose of accessing customer card information, and then exploiting the network access, which eventually results in large-scale theft of funds from ATMs. The FBI also mentioned that it expects the ubiquity of this activity to continue, or possibly increase in the near future. So, that's definitely something we need to keep our eye on. Included in this notification was also some recommended controls, which we will touch on a bit later. So what happened next? Well, subsequent to the issuance of the FBI notification, approximately 1 day later, Cosmos Bank, which happens to be India's oldest bank, was hit by what seems to be a similar attack as that which was described in the FBI notification. The attack took place in 2 stages between August the 11th and August the 13th. According to a Cosmos Bank spokesperson, this was a malware attack in which a proxy switch was created, and all the fraudulent payment approvals were authorized by the proxy switching system. The first wave involved the theft of roughly $11.5 million in transactions, and this occurred from multiple countries. In the second wave, close to $2 million was withdrawn through debit card transactions across India. So foreign and local terminals were used in the attack. And all in all, 2,800 domestic and 12,000 international transactions took place using 450 cloned debit cards. And this happened throughout the world, 28 countries in this specific heist. Now, local investigation teams are still baffled. I was looking at the news recently just to figure out where we are with this specific investigation, and as it stands right now, the investigators are saying that the bank that was attacked had well-tested PCI DSS environment, and the attack was never picked up by the Security Operations Center. Now, the attack on Cosmos Bank is certainly not a new attack. The signature of the attack is very similar to attacks we've seen haunt a number of other banks around the world. One case in particular happened in 2016. It was a well-orchestrated attack that targeted one of the largest financial institutions in Africa. In this attack, more than 100 people using forged cards withdrew around $19 million in just under 3 hours. The fraudulent transactions were being approved with the bank having no visibility on these transactions. Now, shortly after the attack, we were asked to help out as the bank felt extremely exposed and vulnerable. And they were afraid that they would be hit, again pretty soon. So I will share with you what happened and how the effects of such an attack can be reduced significantly. What I can say is that it's still amazing that years later, attacks like this is still happening from banks in North America all the way to South Africa and now India. Now, in order to further understand this type of attack, let's look at the simplistic diagram depicting a modern-day bank payment environment. We'll start off at the conceptual view and then slowly work our way down the layers into more detail. Now, shown in the slide, we can see the bank's ATMs that acquire its own customer transactions, as well as those of other bank customers. We also see the foreign terminals that may acquire the bank's customer transactions. Usually, foreign terminals would connect through a payment network like Visa or MasterCard network using the ISO 8583 format or some other ISO variant. The bank's transaction switch would also connect to the payment network and would be able to receive what we call remote on-us transactions or switch the off-us transactions to other financial institutions. On-us and remote on-us transactions would be forwarded to the bank's authorization host for authorization, where account verification happens and limits are enforced. And usually that's where fraud solutions would either be inline monitoring the authorizations in real time or in some instances in near real time. Now let's look at how the attack played out in this specific case. So bank card information was obtained from bank employees through a combination of spear phishing and social engineering. We know that possibly through the same practice, malware was introduced into the bank environment, and it somehow found its way onto the bank's transaction switch. And we're not certain, but we think it may have laid there dormant for some time. Card information was then used to create hundreds of cloned cards and then distributed to a large number of money mules. Once everything was in place, the attack was launched from around 1,400 ATMs across Tokyo. Now, once the switch was compromised and the malware activated, the transaction switch went into a stand-in mode and started to approve these fraudulent transactions. As the transactions never went to the back end for authorization, the limits on the accounts were never enforced, and the bank's fraud detection systems were completely blindsided. Now, this is where the term unlimited operations come from in the FBI notification, and it means that an unlimited set of operations can be performed without it being detected or even stopped. Now, one strange thing, and we need to remember that transaction switches that are compromised usually sits in a PCI DSS environment, which is a network that is completely segregated from all other environments. It is strictly controlled and tested every so often in order to maintain PCI DSS certifications. In addition, the malware managed to get past existing anti-malware, application layer firewalls, application whitelisting, privileged identity management, and DLP solutions, just to name a few. Now, that in itself is a major feat. This is a multi-step attack and is usually classified as an advanced persistent threat using a man-in-the-middle attack. It is advanced because it is using a combination of techniques to subvert critical controls. It is persistent because its external command and control capability can continuously monitor and extract data from its targets even after the initial attack. So how did we get involved in this specific case? Well, the bank was looking for a solution that could be deployed very quickly, in a few weeks to be precise, and without requiring any integration work, changes to back-end or core banking systems, or being reliant on any systems for data. It also did not want to impact the customer experience in any way. So in essence, the bank was looking for a solution that stood separate from all other systems, out of band and not in the transaction path, yet was able to monitor the transaction journey and provide a deep oversight function. The system needed to inspect each and every request and response message, and if it spotted an anomaly, it would raise an alarm. The system chosen to do this was INETCO's Insight. I suppose because Insight is able to capture transactions off the wire in flight in real time, there was no integration necessary or changes to the bank's systems, which made deployment faster and had literally no impact to the customer experience. So let's look at some of the rules and alerts. The bank was looking to stop the fake processing of transactions due to malware or other compromises in the payment environment. It wanted the ability to identify compromised terminals to isolate the attack. So by applying different rules to these attacks, to these terminals, so that there's no major impact to the other legitimate transactions. It also wanted to monitor fallback transactions in real time. We know that fallback transactions are certainly something to watch out for. As we know, it's pretty easy to clone a card by copying the cardholder details onto readily available magstripe gift or loyalty cards. Because we are able to decode the EMV block in ISO and ATM protocols, we get a lot of details about the entry mode. Things like fallbacks can be picked up, and when we see an unusually high number of these types of transactions, we know something's just not right. So this is a sample list of some of the types of real-time alerts we put in place. You can see some standard velocity and value alerts, as well as the consecutive magstripe transaction alerts I mentioned in the previous slide. But I think the most important alert is the last one, which is matching a withdrawal message on an ISO link to its corresponding message on a database link. So if there is a compromise of the transaction switch, we'll be very easily able to pick this up. Now, that's it from a case study perspective. Let's go into more detail on ways to prevent these attacks from happening. Okay, before we do so, we have a poll going on. Stacy, you wanna drive this?
Sure. And Laura, I think that's all I have to do is show this on the screen. Okay, good. We're good to go. And hopefully you all see the same thing that I'm seeing. So what we wanted to do was just get an idea of how many of you out there actually feel that you have sufficient controls in place right now. It's more or less to just gain some insight as to whether or not this whole message and what we're talking about in terms of a layered defense strategy is actually resonating with you today. So with that, I can skip to the results, I think. Oh, I think you need to submit first. I see responses coming in. I'm wondering if I can actually skip to the results now, or how does this work? Usually? Skip to the results. I can skip to the results. Okay. Good. I have to make sure I don't break anything, as I am notorious for doing in these webinars. So right now we can see that a lot of you can react immediately, which is great, but there's still a certain level of vulnerability felt and a susceptibility to the actual attacks themselves. And as you can see, you're not alone with that. It's an area that I think even if we think that we are totally on top of our technology, totally on top of our access and processes, things change so quickly. The malware itself is always changing. You might have some comments on that as well, but I think it's really tough to stay completely on top of this.
Yeah, it's an ever-moving target and really difficult to pinpoint and put solutions in place that never change. You've got to constantly be at it.
Mm-hmm. So this idea of keeping your mind open to layering different things on top of your existing defense strategy is going to be key to staying relevant and being able to reflect and react to these attacks in the future for sure. Now with that, I will close out the poll and we can, I think, move on. Thank you to everybody that participated.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, so let's move on to preventing these attacks. Now, the FBI has put out a list of recommended controls that organizations should have in place to prevent these attacks. Some or many of these controls may already be implemented in most organizations. But I think it's an important checklist. I think it's important to ensure that these, as well as the broader set of security controls, which are usually part of a broader security program, are not only in place and operational, but are constantly tested as well. In addition, I know ATM vendors like NCR have put out best practices that banks and payment processors should consider implementing to protect their ATMs as well as their card base. If you are interested in these sorts of docs, we are very happy to share them with you. Over and above these controls and best practices, I think it's necessary to layer additional security controls to monitor specifically for man-in-the-middle attacks inside payment environments. One additional control is to monitor the journey of a transaction so that we are at least alerted when the transaction is hijacked or tampered with, as it usually bounces around from system to system. And as Stacy had touched on earlier, it definitely goes without saying that there are no silver bullets when it comes to security. Layering security to provide defense in depth ensures that when some controls are subverted, there are other controls still in place to catch incidents, thereby minimizing the impact of such an attack. For example, and as in our case study, I mean, we've got first-hand experience with this, if fundamental security systems like anti-malware, privileged user management, or even DLP systems are somehow subverted or compromised, there should be other systems or fail-safes to continue to provide the layered security, so that any further breach is detected and so that containment strategies can be then effected. Layering security in this way not only makes it more complicated for attackers to succeed with these sorts of attacks, but also helps limit the effects of a breach if one does happen. The first item on the FBI list of recommended controls is separation of duties. By layering security and separating the organizational roles associated with these layers, means that if one function in the organization is compromised by, say, spear phishing or social engineering, other functions are still available to catch the attack. Okay, now let's go into a little more detail to understand why monitoring the transaction journey is so important. This is a generic network diagram just showing an active ATM channel for a smaller to mid-sized bank. So there are no paused internet or mobile banking environments shown in the diagram. Now, even with these environments omitted, we can very quickly see that the attack surface is pretty broad. The transaction path touches a number of network elements and application systems, from firewalls and load balancers to terminal drivers, transaction switches, authorization hosts, database servers, and so forth, before the transaction is authorized and sent back to the acquiring side. Now, along the transaction path, anything can happen. Any one of these devices can be compromised, and the transaction can be altered without it ever going to the back-end authorization host for authorization. With such a broad attack surface, attackers have many avenues open to them. We know of two ways right now. The first is by malware that embeds itself in the transaction switch, or perhaps any of the other elements along the transaction path. The second is by a rogue switch coming online. We understand that the latter as the approach for the Cosmos attack. So focusing a little more on this, we know at the network level, the most prevalent routing protocol or routing protocol for my North American colleagues, excuse my pronunciation. So most prevalent routing protocols within an autonomous network is OSPF, which stands for Open Shortest Path First. We know that the routing table can be compromised, as it makes use of static passwords that's hashed with an MD5 hashing algorithm to communicate things like the link state advertisements with other routers. It is certainly not a non-trivial task to alter the routing table. Once we have access to the routing table, we can change the default gateway to our rogue proxy switch, thereby inserting it in the middle of all transactions. And once this is accomplished, it's open season for the attackers. Now, there are many ways a man-in-the-middle attack can be structured. I've just presented two right now. We need to remember that as much as we consider these attacks to be extremely advanced in its ability to subvert controls, in the most tightest of environments and the most advanced security and fraud solutions on the market, the attacks are only going to get more and more advanced. We need every one of the security systems to be working 100% perfectly, 100% of the time to prevent unwanted breaches like this. But what happens when one of them is subverted? Are there fail-safes in place? Let's move on. So Now, getting back to monitoring the journey of a transaction, I've simplified our previous diagram somewhat and removed the high availability so that I'll be able to easily illustrate the concept I'm going to be taking you guys through. It does seem like a difficult job to be able to monitor the transaction across the journey because there are many links or hops, and the protocols being used across the transaction path can be very different and in many respects proprietary. We may have a mixed ATM environment with different ATM protocols like NDC plus Triton Connect, and possibly others. We may have ISO 8583 links, XML and SQL links in the transaction path as well. What's even more complex is that the fields present in one link may not be present in another. So how do we know whether we are matching the same transaction and not part of another transaction? So that's really where INETCO Insight strength really lies. By taking a copy of the transaction passively across each hop on the transaction path, decoding these messages and then correlating these messages across the journey, we are able to alert in real time when we see deviations from what we are expecting along the transaction path. Going a little lower than the message level, Insight is also able to decode every field and associated subfields in protocols like NDC+, ISO 8583, its variants together with XML over SOAP, SQL, and many more that we see in a modern bank payment environment. With the ability to correlate the transaction and its message fields, if a transaction is tampered with by a man in the middle, say for instance a beneficiary change, for a bill payment, amount changes, or simply just approving fraudulent transactions. With technology like this, we are able to pick up these changes or anomalies and then alert on them in real time. So to recap how Insight helps, we are monitoring the transaction at multiple points. And in doing so, we can plot out the transaction path and monitor the transaction journey. Because we are capturing the TCP/IP link level information, we have access to and visibility into all the transaction fields. And like I mentioned earlier, we are able to fully decode the EMV block as well. We are doing multi-protocol correlation, so we know when a field in an ISO link appears differently on a backend XML or SQL link, and we know when a specific field has been tampered with. Because we are doing real-time multi-point monitoring of certain proprietary protocols, which is not necessarily a strong point of existing fraud tools, we can certainly complement these fraud tools to expand the coverage. And lastly, with open data access, we are also able to forward this rich transaction details to other systems for further analysis. So what makes the solution unique? It makes use of a lightweight transaction capture approach. The transaction information is copied off the wire from all hops in real time and then stitched together to produce an end-to-end view of the transaction journey. We're able to see each and every request and response message and drill down into the message fields. Because of the richness of the TCP layer information, we have more fields available to create unique fraud rules that are able to detect suspicious activity. And lastly, we know that criminals move from channel to channel to exploit vulnerabilities, as well as network blind spots do exist across the Omnichannel environment. INETCO Insight can correlate fields across very different channels. So just looking at the time, that's all I have really time for today. Hope the talk was useful to many of you. If you'd like to know more, feel free to contact me directly. We would, I'm definitely very keen to arrange deep dives and demos. My email is provided on the next slide, and you'll get that after we conduct this poll. Stacy, over to you.
Okay, great. Hopefully I can do this without breaking things again. So quick poll question for those of you out there. As Ugan mentioned, we're definitely interested in scheduling workshops, delving a little bit deeper into one-on-one discussions with those of you that are interested. I feel like we've laid some groundwork for education for sure, but I'm sure there's other questions that are pertinent to your exact environments. For those of you that are interested in sharing this information and perhaps scheduling some follow-up with us, just let us know if you would like to maybe do that immediately or 1 to 2 weeks out, or perhaps this is something that you're considering but you want to do this 6 months out. Whatever. Honestly, it's totally up to you at this point. And with that, I think we can skip to some results for sure and make sure that this poll gets closed out and we get to more of the interesting part of questions itself. There's definitely some immediate need for follow-up. I can see that, and within the next 2 weeks to a month is pretty accurate as well. So with that, let's close out this poll and continue on to the questions. Now, please use your chat window. Feel free to list off any questions that you have. We see a couple already coming in. The first one is, if all protection is online, do you provide any option for malware offline, or if ATM is powered off to be attacked? Ugan.
So let me just understand the question again. All protection is off. Okay, so we capture information in flight as the transactions are happening. If the ATM is taken offline, it becomes extremely difficult for us to be able to pick that sort of attack up. We have one other option, which is installing agents on the ATM themselves, which when the ATM is brought back online, we will receive all the information. That may be a little late, but nonetheless, we will still pick up that set of attacks that took place on the ATM.
Great. If I already have a fraud prevention solution, can I integrate the data captured by Insight in real time?
That is a very good question, and the answer is absolutely yes. We see this as a huge opportunity for INETCO Insights data. Simply because INETCO Insights data has the richness of all the TCP level information. We know on the various links themselves, there's a lot of detailed information like location information, merchant category information, IP address information, and so forth. A lot of that information, as it moves through to the back end, is somehow stripped off. So we can feed a lot of that detailed information in real time into existing fraud tools, so to provide more contextual information, so an accurate risk advice can be given back.
Okay. How can we prevent attacks on POS? We're having too many POS transactions, or we have more POS transactions than ATM transactions.
Yeah, absolutely. So INETCO Insight is built for an omnichannel banking environment, so we're able to cater for all the channels, whether you talk about ATM, mobile banking, branch banking as an example as well. POS we fit in pretty naturally because POS seems to work with very similar types of proprietary protocols where we have the deep expertise and the ability to decode. So when we connect to POS devices, either using ISO 20022 or ISO 8583, we're able to pick up all the kind of message field details, and then build very unique rules around that to be able to detect high value fraud coming from specific locations, implausible number of transactions taking place, from risky merchants, and so forth. So there's a whole host of rules we can certainly create.
Great. Can INETCO Insight actually stop high-risk transactions from completing?
Another great question. As much as INETCO Insight is built to alert and provide that view, almost like I said earlier, an out-of-band capability, something that doesn't necessarily impact the customer experience. So as much as, yes, we do alert, we certainly can also provide a risk advice. So as a very simple example, if we pick up fraud patterns like we're seeing here, we can provide the risk advice back saying, block these transactions from these set of ATMs or from these foreign ATMs, so that we can actually stop the fraud from happening, not only just alert on it.
Great. If we have a privileged user management in place, do we still need INETCO Insight?
I think, again, it comes back to my talk. I think we want to layer security controls. I don't think there's one solution on the market that can necessarily prevent all fraud attacks out there. So, if you've got a privileged user management system, great, make sure that it's tested and it's working. Like I'm saying, even the cases we've seen, those privileged user management systems were bypassed. So it doesn't necessarily mean you've got one solution that, you are protected. And I think even the FBI list of controls do intimate or suggest that we need these advanced capabilities to manage privileged users. Absolutely. But I think, adding a layer to monitor the transactions as well is equally important, simply because sometimes those controls can be subverted.
Okay. And similar question here. If we have anti-malware software, do we still need INETCO Insight?
Same response, absolutely, because again, these environments, whether you've got anti-malware, whether you've got antivirus, and the latest and greatest technologies out there, sometimes zero-day attacks, are not picked up quick enough. If you've got a simple monitoring tool like this, basically auditing the transaction journey itself, if it is a zero-day attack, you'll still be able to pick it up. So, again, to answer your question, if you have an anti-malware solution, I still think you need other solutions to be able to complement it.
Okay. Can you monitor ATM service transactions from a third-party application?
Yes, we can. I'm gonna say yes, because we are capturing the transactions as they go across the wire. So any established connection from an ATM to a third-party system on the internal network, we'll be able to capture those transactions and then report on them. So even things like, I'm just thinking out loud now, even things like when an ATM is attacked and is, let's say, under remote control, we'll be able to pick up those transactions. The fact that there is, traffic coming across the wire that's not necessarily the kind of transactions we are expecting, we can alert on that as well. So yes, absolutely, we can monitor third-party services on an ATM.
Okay. And this is a confirmation that somebody's looking for. Just to confirm, INETCO not only has the capability to alert, but can also decline when certain patterns, trends are detected?
Yeah, it relates back to the earlier question I answered. So absolutely, if we work with the organization and set up the right risk advice that INETCO solution should be putting out based on certain alert types, absolutely. We just got to be cautious that we don't want to impact the customer experience. So we've got to be very cautious on how we implement these rules. So we work very closely with organizations to make sure that when we do implement the stop or halt function or step up authentication functions, then we have definitely looked into the rules and made sure that has minimal impact on the customer experience.
Okay. If we are looking for best practices, where do you recommend we look?
Yeah, there's a number of sites available. I mean, certainly our partners like NCR and so forth do put out best practices. Like I mentioned earlier, there is a best practice document available. I think NCR also does send out regular email blasts, so be on the lookout for that. Stacy, I'm not sure from any of our other partners if you've got any other comments there.
Yeah, well, just a note about NCR here. I think if you just Google NCR security alerts, I know I signed up for their alerts and they're fantastic. It's nice to get them. They'll keep you up to date on best practices. Some of the sites that we've also pulled information from, such as Krebs, seem to be a good reference site as well. And then, of course, I know there's some other membership groups out there, ATMIA, security group, etc. And that tends to be okay for information as well. But yeah, I think if we can be of any help in terms of locating resources for you for best practices, we're totally willing to help out with that. So
I see there's another interesting question that just come in at the very bottom. You want to read it out?
Are there any performance issues, latency, or lag in the transaction with the solution? Oh, that's a good question. Yeah.
Yes, very good question. So again, because we are sitting passively on the network, we're using technologies like SPAN or TAPS to be able to get the information off the wire. And most of the banks we deal with in this day and age have got big enough, switching technologies in the data centers. So getting back to the point, because we are capturing a copy of the transaction, we in no way impact the performance of the transaction. So the transaction still continues as usual. Sometimes we are able to put, stitch the transaction together faster than the transaction even gets to the back end. So yeah, absolutely no impact on the performance of transactions.
Great. And then there's a question here about omnichannel fraud. Can you pick up on cross-channel transaction fraud?
Yes, if Insight is set up to monitor, the omnichannel environment, certainly we're able to pick up, when we have a transaction that takes place, let's say, on internet banking. Maybe there's some bill payments happening, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, there's a transaction taking place, 500 kilometers away. We know it's not possible for you to be traveling that sort of distance. We're able to pick up the geolocation information and all those kind of things from the transaction information, stitch it together, and then provide a risk advice out for that specific set of transactions. So certainly, yes, we can pick up transactions across the omnichannel environment and build rules around them.
Great. Well, with that, I think, believe it or not, we're right on time. We promised to be finished in 45 minutes, and I think there's a couple more questions that have come in. I will say that we can answer them offline, if that's okay, Ugan, and we'll let everybody go about their busy days for sure. And again, a big thank you to Ugan for joining us today and spending some time and sharing some of your knowledge with us. And thank you to our audience for taking time to learn. If there's anything else that we can be doing to help you out, by all means, just email us. And with that, we'll wish all of you a fantastic day.
Bye-bye. Have a good day, everyone.
We'll see you.